So today I'm going to show you guys how I make paper, and all of these things can pretty much be found in your house or for super cheap. I will warn you now that this is kind of wordy and it goes through like literally every single step from making the frame to the paper. So you can skip the beginning if you just want to watch the process, and I'll put in some timestamps so you can navigate this pretty easily. So what you're going to need is a frame of some sort. You can use a canvas or a picture frame. Michael's almost always has a frame sale going on, and you can buy either of those from the thrift store and then just take off the canvas and take out the interior of the frame. You can use the canvas later for the cover of a book if you want to bind some pages together, and then it's not wasteful at all. You'll need paper pulp of some sort. What I'm going to show you guys is how I tear apart a book and recycle that. You can use grass, you can use dryer lint, you can use really anything, junk mail, old homework, anything that is organic and can be blended down. You'll need a blender. I got mine from Walmart for $20. You can get another at the thrift store for super cheap, or if you don't have access to that, you can just rip it really small. That sounds very tedious. I would suggest going to the thrift store and getting a blender. You will also need a bucket or vessel of some kind to put your paper pulp in with water. Now, it needs to be bigger than your frame, and if you'll notice in the beginning clips, I have a big ass canvas, so you need a big ass bucket, and my bucket was still hardly big enough. So you need to be really mindful of that, because otherwise it's going to be so hard to make your paper. Get a good sized bucket. Mine was $5 at Walmart. I'm sorry, there's a Walmart in my backyard. I'm sorry. You'll need water. You'll need a sponge of some sort. Towels can work as well, but it gets super wet and it doesn't wring out as well as a sponge does, but that's fine. You can use a towel as well. The sponges I use come from the car washing section of the store. You can get the big ones that are pure sponge. Those soak up a lot really fast and don't wring out very well. The one I'm using a lot in this video is a microfiber sponge. Works perfectly as $1 more than a regular sponge. And you can use the ones that are just in your house too. And you will need something to place your paper on when you're done. So what I use is a top sheet. I am way too much of a mover in my sleep to use a top sheet in bed, so they're all just trash for me. They're just free fabric. So you'll notice in this video I'm just ripping it up and go to the thrift store, find whatever you can find. I like to cut mine into pieces. I would highly suggest this. I did in the past use just a full sheet on the ground and just put all my paper on it, and that was not a really good idea, because when you first put down your paper, there's so much water in the frame and around it that you'll need to be able to pick up the fabric, which is totally fine. You can pick it up and the paper doesn't move or anything. You pick it up and move it to a different spot so that it's on dry ground. That will help it dry a lot faster. It took days and days for it to dry when it was on this big sheet. Just try not to do that, I think. And I have seen, videos online of people where they will use clothespins to hang up the fabric with the paper on it. I have tried that, and maybe it was just because I was working in my garage where the wind was blowing. It was really wrinkled paper. It didn't work super well for me. It worked a lot better to just lay it down on the ground. Alright. So these are the frames that I'm going to take off the canvas of. Usually if you buy a paper frame, it'll come with 2 frames, and that's because one kind of holds the paper in place, but I have found that I don't really need that, so I am making 2 frames here, and only one will be meshed, but I only need one usually, so that's why I'm not really showing the second frame very much. And this mesh is just from the local hardware store, and it is just window screen. If you don't have window screen and you happen to have cheesecloth, I have heard that that works okay, but I have not tried that myself. But if you're willing to try that and that's what you have access to, let me know how it goes. I am going to, usually I would staple it on, but as you can see I ran out of staples, so we are using nails. And for another one I use thumbtacks, and I think that works pretty well. You'll notice that when I'm nailing it, I bend over the top half of the nail. You should do that because otherwise the mesh can just lift right out of the top of the nail. So you'll just want to try to bend it over like a staple would. So you can see also I am going from side to side. I am turning it around, so I'm not doing one side all at once. So this just helps maintain the tautness and the evenness, so that one side doesn't have way more mesh and the other one is like really hanging on by a thread. And that is the frame all meshed up. This is a smaller version. This frame I got for 99 cents at the front of Michael's, and it is just a tiny 4x6 frame, but I love the little teeny tiny papers that it makes, and it's super easy, and I'm using thumbtacks for this, and it worked perfectly. I really highly suggest using thumbtacks if you don't have access to a stapler like that. This is how you're going to want to cut out a text block from a book. There I'm keeping the book cover, and I'm using that to bind a book later. So I'm just ripping out every page individually, and then I'm going to start ripping it into teeny tiny pieces. This part is kind of time consuming, and it does hurt your little wristies. Maybe it's just because I'm disabled, but it hurt me. You can use a paper shredder if that's easier for you. It works perfectly fine. And then I kept a second bucket for those pieces of paper, and I put some water in it because you are going to want to let your pieces of paper soak in water so that when you put it in the blender, it's super, super soft and just ready to blend. And this is my top sheet that I don't sleep on. As you can see, I am using the frame as a template to make sure that just the pieces are big enough. It ended up being like 3 columns of the top sheet and then maybe 10 little rows. At a certain point, I just start cutting notches and then tearing the sheet. That worked super well. Just depending on the type of fabric that you're using, that could probably work for you. Also made me look super buff. Love that for me. So that is about as much paper as you're going to want to put in there, and then you're going to fill it up with a lot more water than that was. You'll see me refill the blender with more water. You're going to want to put just a lot of water in, and then just blend it to the best of your ability. This is a pretty good consistency for it. You could even do a little more if you want. So then you're going to fill your bucket, whichever one you're using for the paper pulp, with water, and then you're going to pour your pulp in and then just sort of mix it around. Mix for about at least 30 seconds to a minute just so that all the chunks are kind of dissipated within the water. And you're going to want to kind of have a lot of water in there so that the ratio of paper pulp to water is a little bit more like this pink frame, so that you're not getting like the world's thickest piece of paper unless that's what you want. So this is how you're going to make your paper. If you notice the sort of dipping in the frame at an angle that I go in. And then on this particular one, a lot of paper goes on the edges, so I just dip it in the water and shake it a little bit while it's in the water, and that helps get the pulp off of the edges. Make sure that your fabric is as smooth as possible, because if there are wrinkles and when you move it, your paper will tear, and then you're just going to sponge it off. And you'll also notice that I am using not the interior of the frame. You might think that that is a good way to get exactly the size of paper that you want, but don't do that because it's further away from the fabric, and so you have that like gap. You're pushing too much on the mesh. Just do it on the side that is flush with the frame. And then peel it up really slowly so that you don't rip it or get too many air bubbles or anything. And this is a mistake. So this is what you do if you mess up. See, I didn't like how chunky that was, so I just flipped it over, shook it around in the water a little bit. It all comes off super easy. Then I'll mix it again so that pulp is mixed. And here you'll notice it's just a little sparse on the side, so I'll dip it in. Sometimes that works. Here it did not. So again, I just flipped it upside down and shook off the paper pulp back into the water. And this is a good example. Look how good that was! And then this is how you are going to take off the paper once it's fully dried. You need a hand on the bottom, help to guide it. And this is what your paper's gonna look like. If you want it to be more flat, you can put it in a press. You can put it underneath a bunch of heavy books. There you go, that's your paper. Please let me know if you have any questions, if I can assist you in any way. I know this is not super clear, but I gave you the gist, hopefully. Hopefully you can look at this and extrapolate some sort of thing you're supposed to do. Kisses.